a single street in East Los Angeles could expose one of the most dangerous criminal ecosystems operating inside the United States? And what if that ecosystem had already infiltrated cities across the nation without anyone noticing? Before sunrise on a quiet October morning, those questions stopped being hypothetical and began unfolding in real time under flashing lights and breaching charges. The clock read 5:12 a.m. when federal convoys sealed the block. The sky was still black, interrupted only by the dim glow of neon kanji signs flickering above a karaoke bar, a massage parlor, and a late-night restaurant. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming, just another pocket of Chinatown nightlife. Yet beneath the music, the laughter, and the passing cars, investigators from DHS ICE and the FBI had already mapped a hidden narcotics and human trafficking pipeline operating behind those doors. A pipeline that, according to Homeland Security analysts and publicly available reports from Reuters and BBC, mirrored patterns seen in other organized transnational networks linked to fentanyl production in Mexico with chemical suppliers in China. Armored agents advanced in formation, night vision lenses flashed green, a breaching hammer shattered the karaoke entrance, and the facade crumpled like wet paper. Inside, the shock was immediate. Rows of metal bunk beds stacked to the ceiling, 36 people packed into a room barely larger than a garage, suitcases zip-tied shut, passports locked inside a steel cash box, a wall shelf lined not with liquor bottles, but with bricks of heroin and fentanyl pills stamped with factory codes already flagged in DEA bulletins. The scale stunned even veteran field teams. More than 100 pounds of narcotics sat in plain view enough to kill hundreds of thousands, numbers consistent with current DEA briefings and reporting by The Guardian on fentanyl lethality. And this was only the first room. As agents swept deeper, the reality sharpened. This was not merely a stash location, it was an operational hub disguised as a nightlife strip, a human pipeline disguised as hospitality, a fentanyl assembly line fueled by forced labor disguised as migrant housing. Outside Los Angeles remained unaware. Cars rolled past, delivery trucks idled at red lights, families prepared for the school day. Yet inside this block, another world existed, one where trafficked migrants slept in shifts, passports were confiscated, wages stolen, and movements tracked through GPS-tagged phones. Federal intelligence reports later compared these conditions to patterns observed in transnational smuggling cells across Asia and Central America. What made this operation uniquely alarming was its strategic placement, not hidden in industrial warehouses, not buried in rural compounds, but embedded in a neighborhood frequented daily by thousands and exploitation of familiarity and camouflage. The raid marked the beginning of a larger federal offensive authorized under heightened national security directives from President Donald Trump, who had repeatedly called for escalated action against cartel-linked fentanyl operations and foreign-sourced chemical pipelines. For Washington, this was no longer just a criminal issue. It was a battlefield where public health, immigration fraud, transnational finance, and foreign interference converged. And this raised a deeper unsettling question. If such a network could operate undetected in Los Angeles for years, where else had similar structures taken root across the United States? Could this be only the first layer of a far broader system still hiding in plain sight? The answer would soon emerge, but not before the next doors were breached, the next walls collapsed, and the next cities lit up on the federal operations map. The deeper the agents pushed into the maze of backrooms and sealed hallways, the clearer the truth became. This was not a cluster of small-time fronts. It was an engineered human pipeline disguised beneath neon lights and familiar storefronts. And behind every locked door, every reinforced wall, every hidden chamber, there was evidence of a system built to exploit, conceal, and profit on a scale far beyond local crime. The karaoke bar led to a narrow corridor, then to an unmarked door bolted from the outside. When the metal gave way, agents stepped into a suffocating space no larger than a storage closet, yet it contained 6 people curled against the walls, eyes wide from exhaustion and fear. Across the hallway, another room held 8 more. Some were teenagers, some were elderly. None possessed their passports. Many had injuries that suggested weeks, maybe months of forced confinement. Reports from international outlets like DW and Al Jazeera have repeatedly documented similar tactics used by trafficking syndicates operating across Southeast Asia, where victims are lured with job promises, transported through multiple countries, and eventually debt-bound into labor or coerced criminal roles. The pattern here matched those findings precisely. The massage parlor was next. What looked on the surface like a wellness business had been transformed into a rotation hub. Ledgers on the counter listed names, ages, arrival dates, and coded notes describing compliance levels. Beside them sat a stack of confiscated Chinese ID cards, Malaysian entry stamps, and Ecuadorian transit slips mirroring known smuggling routes through the Pacific and South America, reported by Reuters. The back room told a darker story. Heavy restraints bolted to floor anchors. Surveillance cameras pointed downward from improvised mounts. A bathroom converted into an isolation cell. Every inch of the building had been weaponized for control. The adjacent casino was even more revealing. It functioned less like entertainment and more like a financial engine. Crates of poker chips were stacked beside cash counters, money funnels, and QR code transfer records. Investigators later confirmed that these transactions were used to launder revenue from narcotics shipments, part of a global pattern where small gambling venues act as cash cleansing mechanisms for transnational crime. Yet the most shocking discovery was found in the restaurant's storage area. Beneath crates labeled soy sauce and frozen squid agents, uncovered industrial-sized bags of precursor chemicals and foil-wrapped fentanyl bricks. According to Defense News and Jane's assessments, the supply chain mirrored known routes linking Chinese chemical manufacturers to Mexican cartel production hubs, which then export finished product into U.S. cities. The network operating inside Los Angeles fits seamlessly into this model. By sunrise, federal analysts realized they were not dealing with fragmented criminal acts. They were staring at a fully integrated system: forced labor, human trafficking, chemical logistics, money laundering, cross-border coordination, all functioning inside businesses that countless residents had walked past for years. And yet one question overshadowed everything. How could such an elaborate operation exist in a neighborhood surrounded by police patrols, city inspectors, community associations, and decades of public oversight? Was the city simply blind to it, or had the network become skilled enough to blend so perfectly into urban life that it no longer seemed suspicious at all? The answer, as later events would show, was even more unsettling than anyone expected. As dawn spread across the country, the Los Angeles raid triggered a chain reaction that would expose a sprawling interstate underworld. What investigators found next made one truth undeniable. The operation uncovered in East LA was not an isolated criminal cell. It was a single node in a coordinated network stretching across the United States like a concealed arterial system. And once the first breach occurred, the entire map began to glow. By 4:03 a.m. Pacific Time, while millions slept, federal command centers in Washington, Houston, Chicago, and New York executed synchronized strike orders. Intelligence from encrypted phones seized ledgers, and real-time pattern analysis revealed a repeating sequence of business registration, shipping logs, and financial transfers. Reuters and BBC confirmed that similar fentanyl distribution routes had emerged in recent investigations from Nevada to Texas, routes built around seemingly legitimate storefronts masking illicit cargo. The first major hit landed in Houston. A warehouse on the outskirts of the industrial belt registered as Golden Bay Foods LLC had drawn no suspicion for years. Yet thermal imaging showed unusually concentrated heat signatures behind a false interior wall. When the breaching charge detonated, the explosion exposed a chamber stacked with industrial shelving filled not with food supplies, but with pallets of multicolored fentanyl pills disguised as children's candy. The DEA later estimated the stash at 2.1 million pills, mirroring large-scale seizures recently highlighted by The Guardian and Al Jazeera. But the discovery was only the beginning. Gunfire erupted from the rear of the warehouse, short-controlled bursts the signature of trained shooters. These were not low-level guards. According to initial DHS assessments, they were mercenaries tied to overseas financial backers. The firefight lasted just under 15 minutes before the final corridor was secured. No agents were killed, but the clash underscored the sophistication of the network. This was not street crime. This was militarized resistance. Chicago brought a different nightmare. A cramped apartment above a bakery, harmless on the outside, contained 26 migrants locked behind a reinforced steel barrier. Their captors had fled minutes earlier, alerted by a communication relay that investigators believed monitored law enforcement radio patterns. This indicated active counter-surveillance. International reporting by DW has documented how organized crime groups linked to Pacific trafficking routes often use relay chains and burner devices to track government movements. The Chicago cell fit the profile perfectly. Then came Queens. Flashing neon lights hid a command center disguised as a karaoke VIP lounge. Inside were brokers, coordinators, and transport specialists, individuals with direct links to transnational trafficking channels. As agents surged up the stairwell, they encountered barricades, chained tables, bolted fixtures, bodies braced in formation. It took riot shields and hydraulic spreaders to break through. Inside, agents recovered encrypted messages referencing drop points in Las Vegas, Phoenix, and Atlanta, revealing the network's true scale. By mid-morning, 14 sites across 4 states had been raided. More than 630 agents had participated. Dozens were arrested, hundreds were rescued, and millions of lethal pills were seized. Yet none of these numbers captured the strategic magnitude of what had been uncovered. Defense experts later noted that the network structure mirrored the architecture of decentralized cartel intelligence hybrids, similar to those seen in cross-border fentanyl pipelines and technology smuggling rings. Every state-to-state node operated with military-like discipline, logistical precision, and financial concealment. This raised a chilling question that intelligence analysts debated behind closed doors. If this was only the part of the network visible on US soil, then what did the hidden portion overseas encrypted offshore look like? And more importantly, had the United States only just disrupted the outer shell of a far larger machine, still functioning beyond its borders? The next discovery would make that possibility impossible to ignore. By the time federal agents secured the last warehouse and processed the final detainees, the operation already seemed historic. But the most explosive discovery had nothing to do with fentanyl human trafficking or cash. It came from a quiet, windowless office inside a seafood warehouse where investigators found 3 laptops, 4 encrypted hard drives, and a stack of export documents printed in meticulous technical English. What emerged from those files shifted the raids from a criminal crackdown into a national security alarm. Forensic teams worked through the morning as evidence servers streamed gigabytes of data. Inside the first laptop were spreadsheets labeled with serial codes familiar to defense analysts, radiation-hardened microchips used in satellite systems, missile guidance components, and surveillance-grade imaging modules. These were items under strict US export control. Reuters and Jane's Defense Weekly have both highlighted rising concerns about restricted American components appearing in foreign aerospace programs, and the models listed here matched those findings with unsettling precision. The second drive held procurement requests routed through shell companies in Nevada, Arizona, and New Jersey. Many were disguised as orders for telecommunications equipment or weather sensors, but the specifications aligned with components protected under the International Traffic in Arms Regulations, ITAR. The implication was unmistakable. This network, already tied to narcotics and forced labor, was also operating as a covert acquisition pipeline for restricted US technology. The third hard drive contained the most disturbing evidence. Encrypted chat logs referenced performance testing, cooling tolerances, and delivery schedules for microelectronics intended for military environment deployment. The language closely mirrored phrasing used in overseas defense procurement chains. DW and The Guardian have both warned that some covert networks now blend criminal operations with technology extraction, acting as hybrid intelligence commercial enterprises. The pattern uncovered in Los Angeles reflected that exact model. Across the files, certain names appeared repeatedly: shell companies registered by Ye Logistics chains, controlled by Dejin, and consulting entities linked to Shenzhen. These were not small criminal entries. They were integration points between narcotics, revenue, forced labor, financial laundering, and technology smuggling. The strategic implications were devastating. If cartel-style networks were acquiring US-restricted components, where were those components going, and who was funding the acquisitions? Inside the White House, national security advisors briefed President Donald Trump on what they described as a dual-use threat matrix. Domestically, the network pushed fentanyl and laundered millions. Internationally, it potentially served foreign intelligence goals, extracting sensitive US technology under the cover of everyday storefronts. Defense news reports have repeatedly warned that adversarial states leverage private intermediaries to bypass export controls. Now there was evidence those intermediaries operated on US soil. Beijing responded immediately. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokespeople claimed the raids targeted innocent nationals and constituted politically motivated repression. Chinese state media accused Washington of manufacturing a national security narrative to justify aggressive policing. US officials countered with a firm message. This was not about ethnicity, it was about forced labor, narcotics pipelines, and illegal acquisition of restricted technology crimes that endangered American lives and compromised national security. Behind closed doors, the tone grew sharper. Intelligence analysts warned that the Los Angeles ring resembled a node within a larger transnational network capable of undermining supply chains, corrupting local economies, and feeding sensitive components into foreign military programs. And this raised the next crucial question: if a hidden cartel intelligence hybrid could hide inside American neighborhoods without detection, what did that reveal about the vulnerabilities within the United States itself? The answer would emerge not from geopolitics, but from the streets affected first. As news of the raids spread, the shockwaves were felt far beyond law enforcement briefings and federal command rooms. They rippled through neighborhoods, through families, businesses, and local streets that had never imagined they were living beside a transnational criminal engine. And for many, the aftermath became a second crisis, one measured not in narcotics or technology theft, but in fear, economic collapse, and shattered trust. Within 48 hours, Los Angeles' Chinese districts experienced a seismic shift. Foot traffic plummeted. Restaurants once packed during lunch hours sat half empty. Night markets known for non-stop crowds fell silent. Reuters reported similar community responses after previous anti-trafficking raids in major cities. Fear spreads faster than facts, and entire districts can be stigmatized overnight. Business owners pleaded for clarity. Many had operated for decades, weathering recessions, the pandemic, and relentless rent hikes. Now they faced a sudden collapse in revenue, some reporting drops between 40 and 60%. Delivery drivers waited for orders that never arrived. Shopkeepers stared at empty aisles once filled with regular customers. Even medical clinics and grocery stores with no connection to the criminal network saw dramatic declines. Fear is indiscriminate. It does not distinguish between criminals and the innocent. Residents locked their doors earlier. Elders avoided late-night streets. Parents kept their children close, worried that any unmarked van could be connected to something sinister. Gossip became its own wildfire, driving anxiety deeper into the community. Immigration advocates raised alarms. Many of those detained in the raids were victims of forced labor migrants, misled, coerced, or trapped by debt. Some held valid visas. Some had been kidnapped. Many had been trafficked through smuggling routes, long documented by Al Jazeera and The Guardian. Their suffering became overshadowed by political narratives and public misconceptions. Meanwhile, diplomatic tensions ignited. Beijing accused Washington of racial profiling, demanding immediate consular access, and condemning the raids as collective punishment. Chinese state media insisted the U.S. targeted businesses unfairly to score political points. U.S. officials rejected the accusations. They argued the operation targeted criminal networks, not communities, highlighting evidence of forced labor, fentanyl manufacturing, and covert technology acquisition. DW and BBC reported growing friction between Washington and Beijing, noting that the discovery of export-controlled microchips intensified already strained relations. Parallel indictments emerged in Houston, Boston, and New York cases involving illicit semiconductor transfers, stolen biotechnology data, and laundering networks tied to similar shell corporations. The pattern was unmistakable. The Los Angeles operation was not a lone discovery, but part of a broader national exposure. For ordinary families in Chinatown and other affected neighborhoods, the geopolitical struggle meant little. Their immediate reality was survival. Should they trust law enforcement after witnessing their streets turned into raid zones? Should they fear federal operations or the criminal networks hiding behind legitimate storefronts? Were they being protected or targeted? The human cost of transnational crime extended far beyond its victims. It damaged communities already living between worlds, navigating cultural identity, economic pressure, and political tension. And beneath that tension lay a deeper, unsettling dilemma. How can a nation defend itself against trafficking narcotics and foreign interference without fracturing the communities that make its cities thrive? As uncertainty grew, a new question took hold, one that would guide the final chapter of this unfolding crisis. If this hidden network could erode trust at the neighborhood level, what did it mean for America's broader security and stability? The answer would determine not only policy, but the fate of communities across the country. When the raids ended and the evidence was logged, America was left staring at a revelation that cut far deeper than any narcotic seizure or trafficking bust. What had unfolded in Los Angeles, Houston, Chicago, and Queens was not only a criminal takedown, it was a warning, a message carved into the nation's consciousness that the threats shaping the 2025 security landscape no longer exist at distant borders or in remote conflict zones. They exist inside neighborhoods embedded within familiar storefronts, concealed behind signs written in languages most Americans never stop to read. The exposed network operated like a shadow economy, one that fused human exploitation cartel logistics and the covert extraction of restricted US technology. It functioned with military precision, it adapted quickly, and it depended on America's own blind spots, bureaucracy, overcrowded cities, understaffed inspections, and the false assumption that danger always looks foreign or far away. Defense analysts told Reuters and BBC that this hybrid criminal intelligence structure resembled emerging models seen in conflict zones from Eastern Europe to Southeast Asia. These networks thrive where transparency breaks down, just as they thrive where communities hesitate to report suspicious activity, fearing retaliation or racial backlash. The operation uncovered in the US demonstrated how effectively such networks use diversity, anonymity, and urban density as camouflage. Under President Donald Trump's national security directives, federal agencies recognized that the threat was not simply drug trafficking, it was infiltration, not in the cinematic sense of spies or covert commandos, but through businesses that outwardly appear ordinary. Restaurants, warehouses, casinos, import-export companies, small logistics firms. Every seemingly mundane operation can become part of a sophisticated supply chain when exploited by transnational actors. The raids forced uncomfortable questions about the balance between security and civil liberty. How far should the government go to protect the public? How can law enforcement dismantle trafficking pipelines without devastating the innocent communities around them? And what happens when safeguarding one neighborhood inadvertently ignites fear in another? Freedom and safety often exist in tension. Protecting one can strain the other, yet the United States cannot allow criminal networks to weaponize diversity or proximity, turning communities into shields behind which exploitation thrives. Beyond the legal and geopolitical implications, the human story remains the most painful. Hundreds of victims were rescued, people who lived in silence, stripped of agency, bound by debt, fear, and isolation. Their voices were lost in the noise of political debates, diplomatic protests, and national headlines. And yet their suffering is the reason these operations exist. Every trafficked worker freed, every warehouse shut down, every shipment intercepted, every encrypted file analyzed, each represents a small reclamation of what the network tried to steal: human dignity, public safety, and national integrity. But even as agents closed the final steel doors of the evidence vaults, one truth lingered: this was not the end. This was the first breach in a system far larger, smarter, and more interconnected than the public ever realized. So the question now belongs to the nation. Will Americans treat this as an isolated incident, something shocking but distant, or as a signal that vigilance must become part of everyday life? Because somewhere out there, behind another neon sign, another warehouse door, another shipping manifest, the next node of the shadow economy is adjusting, watching, waiting. And awareness may be the only thing that stops it from taking root again. The story begins with a shocking dawn raid in East Los Angeles, where federal agents uncover a covert transnational network operating behind ordinary Chinatown storefronts. What appears to be nightlife businesses, karaoke bars, massage parlors, late-night restaurants are revealed to be fronts for a heavily organized system of forced labor, human trafficking, fentanyl production, and narcotics storage. As agents push deeper, they find migrant victims held in confinement, precursor chemicals disguised as food shipments, and evidence of large-scale money laundering. The Los Angeles operation triggers multi-state raids across Houston, Chicago, and Queens, exposing armed resistance, high-level coordination, and millions of fentanyl pills packaged for distribution. Yet the most explosive revelation comes from seized laptops, export-controlled microchips, procurement files, and encrypted messages linking the network to technology smuggling routes observed in international reports. This elevates the case from criminal activity to a national security threat. Communities suffer economic fallout as fear spreads while US-China tensions escalate. The raids highlight the fragility of public trust and the challenge of protecting communities without harming them. Ultimately, the investigation uncovers a hybrid criminal intelligence machine embedded in American cities, raising urgent questions about vigilant security and the nation's ability to detect the next